Okay, welcome back. I see lots of you are in suits, which means you have interviews. I wish you all the best of luck. Get lots of jobs. Those of you without suits, you'll get other jobs. Attendants, please sign in. So there's a quirk on the software this year. They changed it. So last year, what I would do is I'd have the attendance open, and then I would close it and then start the poll, which was helpful for my attendance policy, but they screwed it up. So now, this is what happened the first day. If I end the attendance, I have to start a new attendance session to do the poll. Understand? So in other words, I have to leave the attendance open to the poll, which defeats my entire attendance policy. I know. I'm actually not happy about this. I only discovered this inadvertently last week. So, yeah, no, it's very annoying. That's why I had to go back and delete an entire session last week here, so people complain. I have absence of those here, so I'll have to deal with this at another point. Anyway, so the attendance guys have. I'm not so much worried this semester because I have class right before, so truancy won't be nearly as much of a problem. I think I had you earlier in the day last term, but anyway, so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I figured this out last week. Okay, I mentioned this in class last week. We're going to have a review session for the final exam for Property 1. Noon on Saturday in this room. If you have any specific questions, bring them. I'll be happy to answer them. If for whatever reason I don't answer your questions, my office hours will be open afterwards. So I encourage you to do it then. Don't come to my office hours for this during the week. This is the time for doing it. If you have some extenuating circumstances, you can let me know. As a general matter, I don't think you care very much of Property 1 anymore. You probably want to leave that as far behind as possible. But you're probably more interested in learning how you wrote, how you answer the questions, how you manage your time. That's probably going to focus on more than the actual substance material. But I think it's useful, in fact, that you have me twice, that you can learn a little bit of what you did right or wrong last semester. It'll be recorded. It'll be live streamed, so if you can't make it here on a Saturday, that's fine. You can watch from home. But I'm going to try and limit the questions for those who are there. If you want to text your friend a question and tell them to ask me, that works also if you've done that before. But I'll try to keep this as lively as possible. Any questions about that? No? And you can pick up your exams from Cindy Lauermore. Her office is across the hall from mine. I had her print them all out with your names on them, so just go there. You don't need to know your exam number or anything, but you can pick up your exams. I probably sent some of you the exams over the summer, but you get your paper copy if you need. Okay, anything else on that? Yes, Lauren?
Once we get it, could we still come to your office if it's before that?
I'd like you to come after that, because I'll probably answer 80% of the questions during the review session.
Well, I'm saying as far as how you did during property, told us how far we were from.
Yeah, if you come after that, that's when I want to do them.
Okay.
I want to get them all done that day if possible, because I want to move on to Property 1 and move on to Property 2. Make sense? Okay. That's another reason why people actually show up that day, because they have an incentive to see me to talk about their exams. Okay, anything else? Okay. Let's start off with a question. And again, they changed the polling software, so I can't end it. So I'm going to go start poll. You're starting your class. Okay. Now you go like this. Okay, I see. Yeah, they changed the software. It was well-intentioned, but it screwed up my attendance policy. Okay. Polling. All right, so here's your question. It's a true or false question. Actually, a little bit bigger so you can read it. The title and deed are different. True or false? A or B? The title and a deed are different. Everyone see the question? Is it working? Yes? 35 of you, 39 of you, 40 of you were able to click it? right, another 5 seconds or so. Okay. Anyway, the upshot is I have to keep the tenants open at least through the poll. Then I can close it. So it gives a cushion that I'm not happy about, but it will make more problems than it's worth to not do that. So maybe next Thursday they can fix it. All right. Who am I up to? Who did I drop off with last week? Esther, you're up next? All right, Esther. What's your answer here? You said they're different. Okay, why do you say different?
I feel like a title is something like you own, like a title to a house.
Uh-huh. What's a deed?
A deed is more like you get it from somebody.
I'm sorry, louder?
You get it from somebody else. Like a deed, like it transfers. Like if you get title from somebody's house, you transfer it.
Hadia, what do you think about this one?
Deed is a paper.
A deed is a paper. What do you mean a paper? Conveyance. And what's title? So you think they're different? Roxy, what do you think? You thought they were the same? Tell me why. Because of what?
I thought it was in the reading class on that they were interchangeable.
Interchangeable, okay. Evan, what do you think? You think they're the same? All right, let's see what the results are on this one. Okay, so 91% of you said they're different. 10% of you said that they're not different, that they're the same. So the answer is A, okay? They're different. I'm glad a lot of you picked up on this. Most people think they're the same. You know, if you just pull a random person off the street, oh yeah, get the title to my car, get the deed to my house, right? They use these words interchangeably. But they're not the same thing. And the difference actually makes a huge difference. So, what is a title? Okay? A title is the legal relationship. I can't spell the legal relationship between a person and property. The title refers to the legal relationship between a person and property. What does that mean? Well, we discussed what a legal relationship is last semester. Fee simple, right? Life estate, a remainder. The title describes your relationship to the land. So if I ask you, what's your relationship to Blackgate? You say, I have title and fee simple, right? I have a title and life estate, whatever it happens to be. So when I ask you, what's the title of this property, I'm asking you, what are the legal connections between the person and the land? Okay, any questions on that? Okay. The deed is something far simpler, right? The deed is the instrument by which title is transferred. Padilla said it correctly a minute ago. She said a piece of paper, and she's right about that. The deed is just a piece of paper, or it can be electronic nowadays, right? It's what actually transfers property from person A to person B. And in terms of reading today, it's the writing that complies with the Statute of Frauds, right? So the deed's a thing that's actually being signed, piece of paper transferring title, right? The deed transfers the title. They're not interchangeable. So if you hand someone the deed to your house, for example, you're handing them a piece of property, right? But the legal relationship is that you own the house in fee simple, or maybe you have a joint tenancy, or maybe you have a lease, whatever it happens to be. Okay, any questions about that? Just get your terminology straight, because we'll talk about marketable title. And when we say marketable title, I'm not asking about the deed itself. The deed is something separate. Just get the relationship correct. All right, everyone with me so far? All right. So who here has ever actually purchased a piece of real estate? I did, last week actually. I closed on a house on Thursday. So every year I ask this same question, like, no, I'm renting. But I finally closed on a house on Thursday. So actually, like, kind of know what I'm talking
But I actually did Houston. No, I actually went through it myself, and the process is it's complicated, right? Even if you know what you're doing, there are a lot of things that don't always make sense about the process, and you sort of have to figure it out as you're going along. So they want to share maybe the horror stories. That usually works out better, or bad stories about having purchased property. Anyone had a bad experience? You should have one or two. These are usually more fun. None? Okay. Good stories they want to share. Any stories? Hi, raise your hand. You have something in your mouth. Okay, shoot. I'll call on you in a second. Yeah, Megan.
I can share.
Okay, please share with us.
Complication.
Oh, good. That's what I want to hear.
So we purchased a home. We put earnest money down to purchase a home, new construction.
Was this in Houston?
Yes.
Okay.
We live in Edo. For those of you who
Where's
know
that?
where Edo, east of downtown.
Is that Edo?
So it's half a mile, 0.5 miles east of here.
Edo.
E, lowercase a,
Yeah.
capital D.
Okay. My favorite is Dumbo, down under the Manhattan Bridge underpass. That's my favorite Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
Dumbo. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Edo. I've never heard that.
So we put the money down on the corner lot because that's like the only way my husband would move downtown. And maybe 4 months later, they discovered that the corner lot that we thought we put the money down was different from the corner lot from the paperwork from the city of Houston.
And how was that error discovered?
I don't know.
Did you conduct a survey?
No, we didn't conduct a survey. I think somebody was just going through some of the paperwork because you sign the same stuff over and over again, especially with new construction. And it was figured out that the lots didn't match up.
So then what did you do after that?
I had a lot of choice words.
Uh-oh.
Choice words for them, but they gave us.
Did the seller know about this? Were they trying to trick you?
I think they were.
You think they're trying to scam you?
Because we only wanted the corner lot. A bunch of people only wanted that corner lot because it was larger than all of the
so you
other
think they were
lots.
trying to scam you?
Absolutely. And we're 4 months in, we put the earnest money down.
Was it 1% earnest money you put in?
2% earnest money that we put down. Yes. So you can see how.
Did you get it back?
No. So they gave us another corner lot, a less desirable corner lot, for a slightly reduced price.
I see. Okay, some good stuff there I'll come back to. Mike, now that you've chewed, got some time to chew on it. Terrible.
Really I bought a timeshare.
Oh, God.
When I got out of the Army. And for some reason, I roped my then girlfriend into the privilege of also being on the title of it. And it was actually, oddly, quite the nightmare for her just to remove herself, not just from the loan, but from the title. It was quite rigmarole.
She had to buy you out, basically, right?
Yes, it was, and I felt bad for her.
Is that why
afterwards,
she's
but-
never mind.
Yeah, well,
well, timeshare is actually a different deal because you're not actually buying the real property. You're buying basically a share. That's why it's called timeshare. It's basically almost a percentage in a certain unit, which you share with a lot of other people, and then so it's a very odd piece of real estate. Anyone have a good experience they want to talk about? Yeah.
The house that I own in Katy was really fast and simple because I paid cash, so.
You paid cash. You didn't have any mortgage, any contingency?
That's because I'm a widow and I don't have a job, so I wouldn't be able to qualify for a mortgage anyway, so. But paying cash makes it real simple. Because I've had mortgages before and that's a pain in the ass.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I was gonna say it wasn't really like me purchasing it, but my brother's logging company that I work for on occasion.
Logging company, you said?
Logging.
Yeah.
So we purchased timber tracts primarily from the state of Texas to clear them out and take out usable timber and allow new growth to come in. Well, it was actually earlier this summer. A standard deal we normally do to the state of Texas. Turns out his company gets sued by a Saudi prince. Turns out he actually owns the property.
Go figure.
And so the deal with the state ended up it got worked out really quick, but it basically, the deal with the state fell through, but then the Saudi prince was like, you know what, why don't you cut down the timber, you know, and do the same deal. We basically got the same deal for almost half the price.
Oh, okay.
So,
Anyone else?
that's kind of
Wanna
good.
chime in? So my experience was actually pretty easy and smooth. It worked surprisingly well. We basically put an offer down by mid-July and closed last week. The trick is if you get the financing done in advance, which I'll get to in a minute, it moves quickly. If you don't get financing in advance, it holds things up. So we basically closed within 2-3 weeks after making the offer, and everything was smooth. So no horror stories here. But let me walk you through the general process, step by step, to buying a home. The first step is often your eyes are bigger than your wallet. You have to, Mike's shaking his head. You have to first off make an assessment of how much you can actually spend. Now, if you have cash, then you know exactly how much you can spend because you have cash. But for most people, they need to do some sort of financing deal, which involves a mortgage. And that means you have to pre-qualify, and then you get a letter saying, we qualify you for up to $200,000, $400,000, $500,000, whatever the number is, that's what you're qualified up to. Now, just one trick, when you go making offers, the seller wants a letter saying how much you're authorized up to. So this is a trick which I didn't know, but now I know. The mortgage dealer gives you a custom letter for each offer. So say if you qualify for, say, $500,000, and this house is a $300,000 offer, you don't want the seller knowing you qualify for more. So they just give you, yes, you're qualified for the exact amount of the offer you're putting down. It's a little trick. I didn't know that until recently. It's a good trick. But you pre-qualify, it's based on your credit score, et cetera, et cetera. Also keep in mind when you're calculating the purchase price, property tax are the things which factor in, so you have to always bundle in more than what the actual price is. Actually, searching for property is much easier today than it was years ago because a lot of it's available online. You have websites like Zillow and other places that list almost every property. We work with a broker. It actually made our lives a little bit easier. When you're the buyer, it doesn't really cost you anything to work with a broker. When you're seller, it does. But as the buyer, there's not much downside. At that point, when you find the property you want, you do what Megan said. You put down what's called an earnest money. It's usually 1%, or in her case, it was 2%. This is saying, I'm giving you this small amount of money to take the property off the market for some period of time so that we can engage in this transaction. And even before you have the earnest money, it's something called an option fee, which is usually a couple $100, just gives you a couple days to move things along. So you put that money down. You don't give the earnest money to the seller. This is the important point. Did you give it to the seller?
It was all in-house. The financing company, the builder.
Oh, they're all working together.
Everybody was
Okay.
in cahoots,
So generally the way this works is what's called escrow. Okay? Escrow. Not escargot, escrow. The purpose of escrow is to have an independent third party, usually a title company, who holds onto all the payments until the transaction is completed. Because you can imagine if you write a check for 2% to the seller, he runs away with it, you never see him ever again. Because once you write a check, it's gone. So you write the earnest money check to what's called the title company. And they hold on to the funds until everything's done. And if there's disputes, they have it, and they can perhaps release it back to you. So you put down the option fee, which is a couple $100, and the earnest money, which is maybe 1 or 2% of the purchase price. And at that point, the buyer, all of you, has certain obligations, right? And those obligations aren't just, is a house in good shape? You have to check, is the title in good shape? So one of the first things that you have to do is conduct a title search. Has anyone ever done a title search by themselves? You've done it? I usually have students who work for oil and gas firms, and have you done those?
I did them for a city municipality.
Okay.
But
How far back did you search?
for those certain projects, 1800s, 18.
Yeah. It's a patent, right? All the way
Yeah.
back.
Long time ago.
Yeah, so what a title search is, and we'll do one more in depth, I'll explain the process now, is you want to make sure the person selling you Blackacre actually has Blackacre, right? We assume all people in this class are crooks. We just assume they're crooks. A title search is, okay, Josh got it from Bill got it from Sally got it from Mary, etc., etc. And you can trace it back throughout time to make sure there's a clean chain, that there are no disruptions, that there's no one lurking in the background who shows like, aha, I own Blackacre. And Andrew said a minute ago, you go back to the 1800s. Why 1800s? It's what's called going back to patent, basically the beginning of Texas, right? When Texas was a republic and acquired from Mexico. It was a starting point that most people respect. And I think I read you last year about Louisiana. Remember, where did Louisiana come from God? Remember I read you that one last year? I think the first day of class. That's the idea. So fortunately, I don't have to do this myself. I can pay someone to do it, and that's going to pay the title company. It's a couple $1,000s. I mean, it's not cheap, but the advantage is they give you what's called a title insurance policy. What's title insurance? Let's say they made a mistake, and let's say someone actually does have an interest in Blackacre. The title company actually pays you for the value of the house, right? They compensate you for your loss if it turns out that they made a mistake. So it's a very valuable item to have, title insurance. Most mortgage companies require it, so you don't have a choice, but you should definitely obtain it. There's also physical inspections, right? You have to make sure that the house is in good shape. You hire an inspection company, independent, to come in, and they do a thorough inspection. They flick every light switch, they turn on every faucet, right? They open every closet. I mean, they do everything, and they submit a report. And we should say there's X $1,000s of renovations, and then you have a choice. You can say to the seller, drop the price by that much, or you make the changes yourself. Now the rub is often when you're the buyer and you're saying there are X $1,000, you want the number to be as big as possible, right? So you find the most expensive contractors, give estimates. So the seller might be able to get it done on the cheap. So that's part of the negotiation process. You can winnow the price down. They might contribute some money off the top. It's a negotiation process. You also have to make sure you have the financing. So say you said the purchase price of $100,000, you have to make sure you actually can get that. Now, a lot of things can go wrong during what's called this option period, right? For example, Megan told her horror story that they gave her the wrong lot. They're trying to scam her. I mean, that can happen. Often you conduct what's called a survey, where you bring an engineer to measure out the land, make sure everything's fine. But also, let's say the house has a cracked foundation. You don't want to buy the house. Let's say the house has a leaky roof, right? That's expensive to fix. Let's say the house has a termite, which is actually a problem that's not obvious, but an inspection can reveal. Termites in the house can destroy the entire house. Let's say you find that there's actually a lien on the house, that the person selling you had a debt that they didn't pay off, and that as a buyer you now assume that lien on your property, that debt. So there are lots of things that can go wrong. What happens if the buyer says, you know what, I don't want this house anymore, I like this other one down the block. And the seller says, wait a minute, I got a higher offer. Screw you. So there are different ways that things can go down during this period. And the key point is the earnest money, this 2% that Megan put down, stays with the title company. And in theory at least, right? If the buyer engages in bad behavior, the money's released to Megan, right, the buyer. So if the seller engages in bad behavior, the buyer gets it back. But also perhaps Megan says, I don't want this anymore, in which case the money goes to the seller. So the title company plays an important role of making sure that the money is not, distributed until everything is settled. Okay? But let's say everything goes fine, right? You do the title search, title's good. You get your title insurance, you get your inspection done, your mortgage is approved, everything's great. Then you go to what's called closing. Right? Closing is the process by which you close the transaction. And literally they put the keys in your hand. And if you think about it, putting keys in your hand, what does that remind you of?
Rule of season.
What?
Rule of season.
Liver season, exactly right. Remember the clump of dirt, the twiggle? Right? Remember, I told you would never forget that, right? It traces back to feudal origins. Placing the little clump of dirt in your hand, well, now you place a key. I guess the key's a little nicer than a clump of dirt. In some states, the buyer and seller are required to be present at the same time. In Texas, it's not a requirement, which is actually a good thing. You don't want to be there. It's a lot of signing. Your hand hurts. You don't really know this person. Just deal with it yourself. So, but in some states, they do require both parties to be present. And at the closing, a lot of things happen. You execute all the mortgage documents. You execute all the documents to transfer the deed. You have to execute a lot of documents for homeowners association. Lots of your hand's going to hurt, right, Mike? Your hand hurts after that. Megan, your hand hurts. There's a lot of stuff, and you can't use a stamp. They want the signatures to actually match. For whatever reason, it's important. I don't know. So you have to sign the same way 100 times. Like the paper's like this thick. It's a huge stack of papers. Pain in the neck. You can't e-sign. There's no electronic signing. I wish there was. Just click, click, click. You can't do it. After you sign all the paperwork, usually the title company will then record the deed. What does that mean? They take the deed that was signed, they bring it down to the Harris County Records Office, and they say, here, government, Josh just bought this house. And that provides notice to the public that this land is transferred from one person to the next. Again, it can take a very long time. Thankfully, in my case, it took barely a month. But it can take a very long time if there are a lot of contingencies and things that arise. But, you're all intelligent people. Hopefully at one point you'll be able to purchase a home. There are things you're not aware of, but you'll learn. So any questions in the general overview of what happens? No? Okay. Let's walk through what's called the element of a real estate contract. It's on page, I think it's 554. Yeah, 554 in your casebook. And this is one from Illinois. I'll show you the Texas one in a few minutes. I'll start with this one because it's in your book. They're all more or less the same. The purpose of this sort of contract is to explain every facet of the property in a standardized way. Most states have a standard contract. Let me show you Texas ones quickly. Does this look familiar to anyone? Megan, look familiar? Mike? Yeah, I signed one of these a couple days ago, or maybe about a month ago. They're all the same, and the reason why they're standardized is that there's no mysteries. You know what you're getting yourself into. Downside is, if they're standardized, you can't change them. If something you don't like, it's too damn bad. That's how these things work. So at a minimum, the contract should contain the purchase price, how it's supposed to be paid, how much cash is required, that is the earnest money, the earnest deposit, how you're financing it, how long your mortgage is. Second, it should discuss the property, right? You need a survey. Third, you need to make sure you have good title. Fourth, there might be certain warranties or title restrictions. For example, there might be a covenant or an easement across the land. We'll discuss this later. But at a high level, what's an easement or covenant? Permission for someone else to use your land. For example, where I bought a place, I have an easement going along the back that has to allow people to walk across the back of the property. I can't do anything about it. It was an easement made many years ago. Fifth, the date of actually transfer, that is the closing date. Sixth, how do you prorate utilities and property tax? This is actually a big deal. So let's say you have 12 months of property taxes and the seller prepaid, right, his property taxes for a year. The buyer then needs to pay the seller for however many months he's there. Let's say the electric bill, right, and you buy the house the 15th of the month. You have to pay half the electric bill back. So there are different things that you have to deal with proration, or actually surprisingly complicated. Number 7, what happens if the house burns down during the closing period, right? I mean, you can imagine a worst case scenario, right? You close in a house the day before Hurricane Harvey, and they're about to close, and the entire house just gets washed away, right? Who bears the risk in such a case? And often the contract will say, usually it's the buyer bears the risk of some sort of destruction to the property during the closing period. But you can imagine litigation over that. Is there any furniture or personal property? So appliances like fixtures, like an oven or a dishwasher or refrigerator, that usually stays with the house. What's called a fixture. It's fixed to the house. But like a couch or a TV, it's personal property. You can negotiate for it, maybe keep it, maybe not. Ninth, the terms of the escrow, that is who holds the money. 10th, what happens if the deal is not transacted. And finally, lots of signatures. Any questions on the overview? All right, let me walk through this a little bit quickly because it's repetitive. But first off, you list who the buyer, who the seller is. You describe the address, where it is. Number 3, you list all the fixtures. For example, if the refrigerator, if the stove, if the fans are built in, you don't strip out fixtures from the property. Okay. Number 4, what is the purchase price? And specifically, how much earnest money are you putting down? 1%, 2%, whatever it happens to be. What is the closing date? When do you take possession? There are lots of disclosures, which I don't really care much about here, but if there's lead paint, if there's any stuff that kids should know about the property. How do you prorate utilities? So if you move in the middle of the year, there are condo fees, there are homeowners fees, there are property taxes, lots of things that you might have to chop up and split with the owner. Again, this is not riveting, I know, but I'll move through as quickly as I can. Some states require you to hire an attorney. Texas does not. So you don't need one. I didn't need one. I guess I didn't need one, but I didn't have one. And most of the time, the real estate agent knows enough to get you through. You have various inspections. The inspections are at the cost of the buyer. So even if you put down the earnest money, you still have to pay a couple $100 more for an inspection. It's not free to do this. Number 11, what happens if the mortgage falls through? Right? What happens if your credit score dropped below a certain threshold? You lost your job. Maybe you thought you had a co-signer, a girlfriend perhaps, who backed out of the deal. What happens if the mortgage falls through? That's number 11. Number 12, homeowners insurance. This is actually very important. Most of the times, a house can't be sold unless you obtain a policy. And a policy must include flood insurance, etc. So make sure if something happens, you have a good policy. Flood insurance is there, number 13. Condo fees. In Houston, a lot of communities have these homeowners association fees. They're not cheap. It might be a couple $100 a month. Maybe they cover the grounds, the maintenance, there's a pool, etc. But you have to pay these. You don't really have a choice. We'll do a case later this year about the constitutionality of homeowners fees. I think the case was wrong, but we'll get there later. Okay. 15 is the deed. This is actually the legal instrument. 16 is the title. And I just want to focus on paragraph 15. There's a phrase here. It's hard to see, but it says, paragraph 15. The seller shall convey to the buyer good and merchantable title. That's probably the most important word in the entire document. Good and merchantable title. You'll see it spelled that way. Sometimes it's good and marketable title. Merchantable, marketable, they're synonyms. They mean the same thing. The title's got to be good. And the word there that matters is good. And what does it mean to have a good title? That there are no superior interests over it. That someone else can't come along and say, aha, I own Blackacre, right? It's a good title. Now, you can sell a piece of property that has a lien on it or an easement on it, but you got to disclose it, right? There's nothing wrong with selling a piece of property with a mortgage on it. There's nothing wrong with it. It happens all the time. But you have to disclose it. If you tell someone I'm giving you a good title, and it turns out there's some sort of something encumbering or something over it, you're screwed, right? You've breached your contract. But you also have a duty as the buyer to do your title search, because you can't trust the seller. Because generally speaking, if your seller is willing to give you a fraudulent piece of property, he might not be able to help you out on restitution, which is sort of what happened to Megan. They couldn't really give your money back because, it takes this other lot, which wasn't as good. Do you know who actually got the good lot?
Yes.
Do you know how that happened, how they got the good lot?
So we think he knew someone who worked for it was one of the realtors.
So you got a good deal.
Builder side.
He got the deal. Anyway, and one related point. If you remember from the UCC, the implied warranty of merchantability, does that sound familiar? It's a similar concept, the good and merchantable title, good and marketable title. 16 concerns the title insurance. Make sure you get that. 17 is the survey. This is very important. So remember the well, that was a Howard versus Kunto, right? The case from Washington where you had everyone's house was like 50 feet over where it should have been. Make sure you have a good survey done. It doesn't take very long. They usually do it in a couple of days. It's not cheap. It's like $1,000. So it's not mostly cheap at all. But you have your own copy of the survey. Make sure you're buying what you're actually trying to purchase. Escrow is where the third party holding the money. What happens if there's damages prior to closing? This is actually a big deal. If you're trying to close around hurricane season, probably something to think about. We were worried about that, but so far so good. There are various real estate taxes. The seller must make representations about any sort of zoning violations or boundary disputes. Think of the Lohmeyer case, right? Where they failed to disclose the zoning violations. The purpose of this contract is to think of every conceivable problem to disclose. Because if you say, oh yeah, I disclose everything, and you sign your name, you're done, right? So even if the common law doesn't require you to disclose it, this form will probably get just about everything. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Condition of the real estate, any municipal things, business hours, yes, some faxes is a thing. Surprisingly, yes, a lot has been by fax. It's very annoying, but the fax still exists. Remember this time is of the essence? Remember that from contract law? A lot of contract terminology you'll see in here. Choice of law, you apply Texas law, or in our case. Okay. This is important. Where is it? I'm going to keep scrolling. There's a lot of stuff here that just really doesn't matter. Which paragraph is it? Oh, wood destroying infestation. That means termites. That's a significant deal. Paragraph 41. Okay, here we go. This is something most people don't realize. So, Mike or Megan, when you were buying, did you work with a broker?
No.
Did you, Mike?
I don't think
We
so.
had a realtor that was under a broker. So-
Now, did you trust this guy? Oh, this is a timeshare. Right?
Well, when we bought our house, with the timeshare, that was bad. But when we bought our house, it was friends of my wife's that she had known for a long time that was the realtor. So we trusted her recommendation.
Now, do you know if that person was a buyer broker or a seller broker?
I don't know.
And did you work with a dealer when you bought your house?
Yeah, I worked with realtors.
Did you know if it was a buyer broker or a seller broker?
I've worked with both,
Do you know the difference?
yes.
Tell us.
Well, if you're acting as a buyer's agent, you have to work in the best interest of the buyer. If you're acting as a seller's agent, you have to work in the best interest of the seller.
Very good. So most people don't realize this, right? They don't realize this. When you, very good. When you go to a real estate agent, you need to ask them very bluntly, who are you working for? Are you this is the text form, by the way. It's very easy in the text form to figure it out. Are you a buyer agent? Or are you going to be a broker sub-agent? What does that mean? If you are a buyer's broker or the buyer's agent, you work only for the buyer. But if you're what's called a broker sub-agent, basically a seller's agent, you're actually working in connection with the seller. They're not obvious about this. And I'll tell you why does it matter. Let's say I say, look, I can't spend more than $200,000. That's my limit. My mortgage is only $200,000. Put down an offer for $175 and see what happens, right? You're telling them, look, my limit's $200. I can't go above that. But let's start at $175 and move up if you need, right? I mean, if you're trying to negotiate, that's a reasonable strategy. So if you have a buyer's broker, they'll go there and say, look, my client can only do $175. That's all he can do. And maybe they'll take it, maybe they won't. Now, if it's a sub-agent, you'll say, well, look, my guy wants to start at $175, but he can probably do like $190, $195. What do you think? Why is he not keeping your confidence? Because he's a dual loyalty. The loyalty is not only to you, but also to the seller. Why? They split the commission. They split the commission. So the higher the price is, the greater the commission is. And again, this is not like evil, right? It's not like he's deceiving anyone. The important point here is that he's working for two people, and you can do that. So on the Texas Real Estate Commission form, you have to indicate who are you working for, right? Are you working only as my agent, or are you sub-agent? Are you also representing the seller? And you gotta, say bluntly who you're representing, right? In my case, the broker, he had never even met the other agent, didn't even know him. There was no relationship, so I felt confident giving him my numbers. But otherwise, you don't know if you can negotiate in good faith. So anyway, just keep that in mind. Most people don't appreciate the fact that they have these dual loyalties. They just aren't aware. And again, it's not obvious. You think, this is my guy, right? This is the person representing me. He might not be. Mike, did you have any experience with this? You're shaking your head.
Only so much as the family we bought our house from actually had their friend as their agent, and it didn't end up actually working out well for the agent or the because the buyer or the seller refused to listen to his professional advice.
Oh, is that right?
And it just sat, and he ended up selling in a rushed fashion because he was coming up the end of contract. He didn't want to incur extra costs, and the selling agent did not want to renew.
Wow. So it didn't work out well for anyone, basically.
Well, it worked out well for us.
I'm glad to hear it. Okay. All right. I think that's all I want to say about this. But we'll move on. Anything else you want to ask about this? Any questions? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to point out, if you're selling your property, you can always tell, because you're the one, as the seller, you're the one paying the agent's commission.
Yeah.
So you can always have a point in the contract where if they happen to be the agent that brings the buyer,
Yep.
also you can get them to reduce it.
Yeah.
Like usually it's standard is 6%. You can say, if have somewhere in the contract, if I happen to bring the buyer, then I'll reduce my commission to.
Now, does the buyer know that though? Does the buyer know that they're in cahoots?
But I'm just saying, if you're selling your house,
You don't
remember
care.
that.
You don't care about that.
I don't care if I'm the seller.
You're the when you're the seller, you call the shots a lot more. When you're the buyer, you're sort of at the mercy of the seller. Right? You're nodding, yeah. Yeah, in the case where I was, the guy selling it was actually his own home. He was a real estate agent, but he was not a residential. He did commercial real estate, so he actually had to use his father's license. I don't fully understand it, but it worked out in the end. But there wasn't too much of a hassle because he actually sort of knew what he was doing with his own property. Anything else on the contract sale? If you go to the Texas Real Estate Commission website, just Google TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission, they have all these forms. And I think I linked to them on the course page for today, so you can download them at your convenience. But they're all pretty similar, and all the states have the same sort of disclosures. Any questions on that? No? Okay, we can move on. Our next topic is one that every time I say the phrase, it just instills fear. And these flashbacks. The Statute of Frauds, right? The Statute of Frauds. Now, the good news is it's a lot easier in my class than it was from contracts. I don't need to know nearly as much about the Statute of Frauds as you guys know in contracts. I only need to know one thing. Was the deed signed by the parties to be bound? That's all I need to know. There are some exceptions we'll get to in a minute, but if the deed was signed by the parties to be bound as the buyer and the seller, we are in good shape. Okay? Now, the Texas Statute of Frauds, I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can read it. Now, the resolution on this classroom is different than last semester, so I have to keep making the font bigger. I apologize. It's straightforward. This is section 2601, Texas Code. A promise or agreement in the subsection is not enforceable unless it's in writing and signed by the party to be charged with the promise. So what kind of promises need to be signed? It lists several of them. A contract for the sale of real estate, that's real property. A lease for longer than 1 year. So in theory, if you have a 6-month lease, you don't need to be in writing, although it's probably a very bad idea to do that. For the sale or commission of oil or gas lease, oil or gas royalty, minerals, etc., and other things. So the statute of frauds applies fairly broadly. Okay? No questions about that? There are 2 exceptions to the statute of frauds that are relevant to our class. I'm sure there are a lot more. They cite in other classes, but there are 2 that I want you to know. One of which is part performance. Part performance. And this is extremely important when it comes to real estate. Right? So imagine the situation. You think you're closing on a house on Friday, and you're in another house. So you sell your house in anticipation of moving to this other house on Friday. Then stuff falls through, and you're left with that house. Which is why, what we did, we extended our lease like a month beyond the closing date, just in case. So we're still in the apartment, right? But the important point is, don't move too quickly, because things can always go wrong. So there's an exception to the statute of frauds for partial performance. In other words, even if the contract is not signed, you can allow enforcement when the acts performed by the parties are adequate to show there was an agreement, right? Even if it's not signed, you look to the acts that the parties performed to show there was an agreement. So let's say there's an oral contract to purchase a piece of property, right? And let's say that a down payment was made, and maybe the person moved in. Equity, fairness, because it's partial performance, says we will enforce the contract even though it's not written. Right? Again, they did basically everything. They had the payments, right? They moved in, but they don't have a written contract. The courts can still step in and enforce the contract. Any questions on partial performance? Oh, yeah.
So you're saying look to the act shown that there was a contract?
Look to what the parties did. If they acted like there was a contract, the courts will assume there was a contract. So even if they don't have a written contract to transfer property, if they paid money for down payment, they moved in, they did all the sort of things you would usually do, the court can still enforce it, even in the absence of a signed writing. That's the key point. You only get to the statute of frauds when there's no signed writing. If there's a signed writing, you have a statute of frauds. You don't have to worry about it. Right? Texas law requires a writing for real estate transactions, but if you lack that writing, you have to check the exception to the statute of frauds. That's where it comes in. Make sense? Yeah. Thank you. My pleasure. Any questions on part performance? All right. The second exception is one you're probably very familiar with, called estoppel. Right? Estoppel. This is a phrase that comes up, I swear, in every single class. Look up what it means in the dictionary. It won't be very helpful, but it means basically unfair. Right? If you have no written contract, but it'd be very unfair to one of the parties, courts can step in and enforce it anyway. For example, there's a concept of unjust enrichment, which comes up a lot. There's a concept of detrimental reliance, that I relied on your oral promise, I sold my house, I was ready to move in, and then you screwed me over. Okay? Fairness. If there's an unconscionable injury, right? There's no clear indication of what estoppel means in any given case. It's very fact specific, and the courts usually have fairly wide latitude when exercising their equitable jurisdiction. By the way, the UCC doesn't apply to real property. Just keep that in mind. I don't think if your answer on my exam is about the UCC, you're wrong. It doesn't apply to real property. So the concepts are very similar. They're very similar concepts, but just don't give me UCC. That's not the right answer. Any questions on this so far? Let's do the first case. Hickey versus Green. Costa, you next? You've been on the trepidation for an hour, haven't you? You've just been waiting at pins and needles. I'm sorry to keep you hanging. So you want to please give me the facts in Hickey versus Green?
Yeah. So there's a lot owned by Mrs. Green.
Good.
To sell, that they orally agree with the Hickeys. She orally agrees to sell $15,000.
Okay, good.
There was a $500 deposit that he gave Miss Green.
Good.
And they told Miss Green that they were going to put their house on the market and build on her lot.
Good.
When they bought it. So they proceeded to sell their house.
Well, just what, Costa, just give me this one more fact. What sort of payment did the Hickeys provide?
It was like a $500, I think, was the deposit.
Okay, good. Tell me about the check.
She was not cash.
What was written on the check?
Deposit on lot, then give the address, subject to variance from.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, so Lucas, so imagine, right? The Hickeys and the Green were negotiating for this deal, and they come with a purchase price. And the Hickeys say, okay, we'll give you $500, and we'll give you a check. Now, was the check fully completed?
No.
The check was not completed. What was missing from the check?
The endorsement. She never actually signed him.
No, from the Hickeys, right? I know Green never cashed the check, but what was missing from the check from the Hickeys' perspective? Important thing was missing.
They left the pay line and deposit check blank.
What does that mean?
That means they didn't know who to write the check to.
Very good. So, if you write a blank check, that's very risky, isn't it?
Yeah, because you can just put
Anyone, can fill in whatever name you want. And this is like before computers. Like, you couldn't check these things very easily. So they made a blank check because they weren't sure whether it was to Miss Hickey or I think the brother who would be the correct party. So there was some uncertainty, right? Justin, what else? What's the significance of this variance language? Why was that added to the check?
Just because they thought that the completion of the agreement would be dependent on some sort of zoning issue from the city.
What does that mean, zoning issue? What does that mean?
I guess the zoning variance they talked about, that they talked about.
So let me answer this question. If you want to buy a piece of property and there's some sort of zoning dispute, how would you handle that?
You'd have to determine, what zoning regulations that property would fall within.
I mean, if you wanted to deal with the zoning dispute, would you just write a little notation on the check saying subject to this? What would you do? What document would be the smart way of handling this?
The zoning laws?
No. We just spent a lot of time on it.
Oh, the purchase agreement?
The contract. And what would you say in the contract?
Subject to the zoning.
And what happens if, for example, the zoning variance doesn't come through? What happens to the contract? Void. He's right. So if there was any sort of dispute about whether you needed some sort of zoning variance, whatever happens, we'll do zoning later this semester. That just means permission from the city to build something, right? If there was some dispute, you could say in the contract, we're buying this house contingent upon obtaining a variance from the city. And I think Justin said it well. If you don't get that variance, then the deal falls through. You understand what I'm saying, right? You have the deal contingent on the variance. But again, these parties do not seem sophisticated. And by the way, when I say they're not sophisticated, I don't mean they're stupid. That's a very common conception. They didn't have a counsel, right? They were people trying to live their lives and buy a house, and they didn't know these things. So they thought, okay, look, I'll give you a blank check, just fill in the name, whoever's the right person, and we'll write in the back, subject to variance, because if you don't get the variance, maybe you won't go through with it, right? So, from our perspective, like, these people were not careful. But from their perspective, it's, they were doing the best they could, right? And again, don't fault people without legal training for making mistakes, because a year ago you didn't know anything either before you came to law. You didn't know anything for sure. So then they give this check, right? But then they made a mistake, right? I don't fault them for writing this in the back of the check. That was fine. But Samantha, what mistake did the Hickeys make that they probably shouldn't have made? They did something that a little bit too ambitious, maybe.
They went ahead and sold their house.
Yeah. Real quick, didn't they?
Yeah.
Fastest sale ever. How quickly did it sell?
It was like 10 days.
Yeah. So, again, I don't fault them for doing this little variancing of the check. They were doing the best they could, but they probably should have waited a little bit more. Now, Samantha, the harder question. Why do you think they were so quick to sell their house?
Probably because they wanted, well, they also told them like they were selling their house, so they kind of wanted to
But
make sure.
why they sell the house so quickly?
It's going to be a lot.
Well, there's another reason why.
Um,
What was the purchase price that they settled on?
oh, it was a lot higher than the purchase.
It was 15. No, but the Hickeys offered how much money, Samantha?
16, oh wait, no, for the other lot, it was 15,000 and they sold theirs.
Do you think they had 15 grand sitting around in their pockets?
Oh, no.
So why'd they sell so quickly?
Had the money to pay.
Yeah, everyone understands the problem, right? They agreed to pay a price they probably didn't have. Their eyes are bigger than their wallets, right? I don't think there's any discussion in the case of financing, right? They didn't have a mortgage. They probably paid cash. So, if you ask me, if I had to guess, I don't know the details, they said, oh crap, we just been offered $15,000. We don't have that much. I got an idea. Let's do a quickie, right? Let's sell our house, get cash, and then flip it around, and we'll live in a hotel for a couple of days, whatever, and we'll flip it off, right? That everyone agrees probably what happened here. I mean, I don't know, but that's my guess. Marcel, did it work out?
No.
No, it didn't work out. Why did not this grand plan work out?
Because Miss Green, or Green, didn't sell them.
She did not. What did Green do here?
No, like we don't have, the contractor, they didn't sign anything, and so they didn't take the check.
She never cashed the check, did she? Did she ever sign the check?
No.
So again, Marcella, one more question for you. The statute of fraud says that the document must be signed by the parties to be bound. Parties, plural. Was this signed by the parties to be bound? Ken, who signed it?
Green?
Green. The buyer, right?
Yeah.
Did the seller sign it?
No.
No. So are we within the statute of frauds here? We covered?
No.
Exactly. Even though the check was signed by the buyer, the check was not signed by the seller. And that makes a huge difference, because again, go back to our statute of frauds, our Texas statute of frauds, right? Signed by the person to be charged with the promise. It's bilateral. It's a buyer and seller, they both have to sign it, right? I can't buy a property where only I sign it and not the seller. It doesn't work like that. So what happens? She never cashes the check, and then, someone comes along, offers them $16,000, $1,000 more. Again, this was a long time ago. That was probably a lot of money. Now, let's see. Khadijah, let me ask you. Sorry?
I said I forgot my name.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I remember most of your names. Give me another week, so I think I'll be back in session. It was the summer. It's slowed down, but I'm slowly getting back in the swing of things. So, Khadijah, let me ask you this question, please. We discussed Megan's problem, where she gave this earnest money, and she never got it back, right? Do we have that problem here, them never getting back their earnest money?
No.
They gave them this check. Is there any problem? Did they need a refund?
No, but she intended to sell her property to.
But the question is, do the buyers need a refund of that check?
If she doesn't intend to sell them, they might not.
Why do they not need a refund in this case? There's a very obvious reason.
Oh, because they never cashed it.
Yeah, there it is. She never cashed it. Everyone see that? They never cashed the check. So there's no need to return the earnest money. Everyone see that? I mean, I suppose you could have ripped up the check, because I guess you can cash it at some point in the future, but because the check was never cashed, there was no need to return the earnest money. By the way, the phrase earnest money, earnest means honest, right? You're keeping someone honest. Oh, she wasn't honest. If she had cashed the check, she would have been in trouble. But she did something a little bit more sneaky. She said, no, I'll just put the check in a drawer and never look at it ever again. Right? This is why usually we put the escrow money, the earnest money, in the escrow account, so you know for sure it was deposited. And man, they're quick. The second they hand that check, it cleared the next day. I mean, they are very quick with the escrow accounts. And in fact, the mortgage company demanded to see that the escrow check cashed and cleared. They were very insistent upon that. Right? So Green here did not act in a responsible way. But unfortunately, she never signed anything, so they can't rely on the statute of frauds. Instead, they have to rely on an exception to the statute of frauds. An exception to the statute of frauds. Right? So Lance, how does the court go about considering this question? Again, we're not in the statute of frauds because it wasn't signed, but how does the court go about considering it?
They basically just looked at the fact that the buyers had sold their house and had relied on the promise.
Okay. So this is the concept of estoppel, right? This is the concept we know as detrimental reliance. Lance, what does this phrase mean, detrimental reliance? You see this all over the place in law.
That you relied on the contract happening, so
Good.
you put yourself in a tough spot that the
Yeah.
contract didn't go through.
Yeah, exactly. So this concept of detrimental reliance means the Hickeys relied on Green's promise to their detriment. They went ahead and they sold their house, and then she turned around on her back and sold it off to someone else. And the law says when you rely on someone's assurance to your own detriment, that the courts can step in and enforce the contract. Now, I'm sorry, Alec, was the Hickeys reliant reasonable? That they went ahead and sold their house in 5 minutes and jumped on this? Was that
Probably not.
maybe they didn't wait to see the check cleared? Who agrees with Alec? Yeah, me too. And I say this as a recent home buyer. I know they were in a hurry. They probably needed the money to go have the transaction, but wait for the damn check to clear, right? Like before you put your house on the market. So I don't know if their reliance was reasonable. I don't think it was, but Alec, what does the court say?
The court said it suffered it did detrimental reliance.
Yeah, they did. No, they did. That without a doubt, right? The court says it was a reasonable reliance to their detriment. I don't think it was reasonable, but what do I know? So as a result, the court said, therefore, even though the contract wasn't in writing, one of the exceptions to the statute of frauds is satisfied. But then they get to the remedy question, where things get a little murky. Oh God, you need a darker marker. Katie. Yeah, I'll give you a black marker later. I can't read that. Katie, what is specific performance, Katie? Right. And what's usually the normal remedy in the contract case? Not specific performance, but the most common remedy for any breach of contract. Damages, right? So courts generally are comfortable. Here, just pass this back. I want to use a darker marker to write your name. Generally, if someone does a breach, you don't have specific performance, right? It's not make the widgets. It's give me money to buy the widgets from someone else. So in contracts, there's a very strong presumption against specific performance. However, in real property, it's almost reversed. Why? A widget is a widget, right? You can buy a widget anywhere. But real property is unique. Every lot is unique, right, Megan? And if you want the corner lot on the nice block, you want the corner lot on the nice block. Not the one across the street, the corner lot that you want. So in property, unlike in contracts, there's a very strong presumption that you give specific performance. That is, you order the sale of the property. Okay? But Harrison, what's the difficulty for the By the way, what court is this case in, right? What level of the judiciary are we in right now for this decision?
We're in the Court of Appeals.
Which court?
Court of Appeals.
What's it called?
The Appeals Court?
You have your book?
Yeah.
Go to the first page. Just read the name of the court.
The Appeals Court of Massachusetts.
Okay, very good. Right? So we are on appeal, right? Was it the Supreme Judicial Court? Wasn't? Okay. I thought maybe I'm wrong. Okay, that's why I asked 3 times. So we are on appeal. As law students, all you read is appellate decisions, right? Every decision reads appellate. But there's something very important to realize. Appeals can take place months, if not years, after the trial. And stuff changes, right? Things aren't always the same on appeals they were below. And let me make this point a little bit more precisely. There's something called the record, right? Kendra, what's a record in terms of appeals? What does that mean?
It's what the court looks at. It's like when you have one of those people that writes down everything that was said.
The court reporter.
Oh, court reporter.
The stenographer, but the court reporter is more, PC.
So they look at that for what happened in the trial court.
Very good. So you should know this, right? If you're ever a trial lawyer, keep one thing in mind. If you don't raise an objection in the trial court, it's waived, right? Why? Because it's not in the record. If you don't introduce a piece of evidence at the trial court, you can't then introduce that evidence on appeal. If you don't make an argument in the trial court, it's out. Why? Trial courts create the record, and on appeal, that record's sealed. You can't go outside the record. Now, judges do it all the time. All the time, judges go outside the record. Don't get me started on the Supreme Court. They never stick to the record. It drives me nuts. They do whatever they want. But as a general matter, courts can't go beyond the record. Appellate courts can't do fact-finding, right? Appellate courts can't do fact-finding. Now, so Megan, right? The question here is, what's the correct remedy? What does the court need to know in order to issue a remedy here? Like, what would the court need to actually know in order to give a remedy? Again, there's a breach, right? Green screwed over Hickey. The remedy that perhaps they want a specific performance, right? But what would the court need to know before they actually award a specific performance?
If the party was damaged and by how much.
And how would we calculate that?
I guess
Megan, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario.
Restitution?
No.
Oh.
For the Hickeys, right?
Oh.
We know that they were out of a house. What's the worst case scenario?
Oh, they just are homeless.
They're homeless, right? 2 years later, however long is they're homeless, living on the street, right? They have no home. In that case, Megan, do you think a court might be willing to give specific performance?
Yes.
Okay, but what if someone else is living in that house? You have to kick them out of the house? Yeah. Messy, right? So the thing with specific performance is you probably have to kick someone out and move someone else in. Now, Chelsea, what happens if they're not homeless and they just bought another house down the block? Do they still need specific performance?
Maybe not, because they didn't really rely on it.
Yeah, maybe they didn't rely on it that hard. Maybe they were just angry about this lawsuit. So then maybe what's the correct remedy in that case, Chelsea? They got harmed without a question, but what's the correct measure of what's the correct remedy there?
Equitable remedy?
Well, equity is specific performance. We'll have to move in. What's an easier remedy?
Restitution.
And how would you calculate that? What would the amount be?
All of the costs.
Yeah.
Costs to them.
Yeah, the cost of having to go buy another house, as well as the cost of legal fees. Lawyers always get paid. Remember, lawyers always get paid. They always get paid. So if you're the appellate court, you say, well, look, we can do 2 things, right? We can say, well, we can order specific performance and evict who's ever in there and let these guys move in. Or, a little bit easier, we can order damages, right? But Lauren, why can't the appellate court make a decision about which is the correct remedy to impose? Why can't they?
Well, I guess, I mean, because because one would, like a Vicky family that's already living in
But do they know if someone's living there?
Oh, yeah, to find that out.
Ah, and how do you find out? Can appellate court find facts?
No.
Who would find it? Which level of the judiciary finds facts?
Trial?
So what does the appellate court do in this case?
I guess they have to look at the case.
No. What's the very end? At the very end of the case, what does the appellate court do here, Lauren?
Remand?
Remand. What does that mean? Oh, you're not done yet. You use a word, you gotta tell me what it means. Do you know what that means?
Send back to the trial court.
Yes, you're done. Okay, thank you. You send it back to the trial court. Very good. Okay? You send it back to the trial court. Why? To figure out what is the state of the union. What's going on now? Who's in the house? Where's Hickey living? Right? How much should Hickey spend to acquire this alternate property? Is he homeless? Is he living on the street? Right? The appellate court can't know any of these things. Right? The appellate court cannot know these things, so the correct remedy is remand it down. Now, Rachel, what do you think the most likely remedy is going to happen? Do you think you're going to evict the person living there and have specific performance? What do you think the remedy is going to be? Yeah. And how much is that amount? How are they going to calculate it? No, I don't need $1, but how are they going to calculate the restitution?
The difference between what they were supposed to pay and what they ended up paying.
Very good. So right, they were supposed to pay $15,000 for the house with Green. Maybe they had to spend an additional $5,000 on legal fees and another house, more expensive, etc., plus interest. You notice that in the opinion? Plus interest? Because it's been sitting for a couple years. So you're trying to make them whole. Not unjustly enrich them, but make them whole for the amount of money they spent because of Green's malfeasance. So I think Green will be on the hook for the difference between $15,000 and whatever the more amount was. Okay, so that's the bottom line of the case, right? Because of Ms. Green's unfairness, the court sent it back to the trial level to decide what restitution should be. I'm fairly certain that specific performance was not appropriate here. Okay, again, I don't think the reliance was reasonable because they never cashed a check. I think the court was a little too nice here. I think they jumped the gun, but whatever. What do I know? All right, other questions on the first case? Yeah, Mariah.
If the court found that they relied unreasonably, they would just be out of luck.
Screwed. Because think about it, right? If the court said that their reliance was not reasonable, then they're not within the statute of frauds, and they don't have an enforceable contract, right? The equities is what gets them outside the statute of frauds. That's the exception. Again, if you're the Hickeys, you're going to make sure that the person you're buying from signs something. Or you're going to wait till they endorse the check and deposit it and then put your house in the market. Now, Mariah, I'll ask you this question. What would have happened if Miss Green had signed the check and deposited it?
Then she would have been required to sell the house.
I think within the statute of frauds, she'd be stuck. Now, the variance issue, they don't really discuss. It turns out you didn't need the variance, so it's fine. But that could have thrown some complications. But had Green signed the check and deposited, I think that would have been adequate for writing into the statute of frauds. Not precise, but I think it would be good enough. Any questions? Okay. Okay, let's do the next case. Lohmeyer. Every year when I read this case, I hate it because the writing is so poor. Most lawyers and judges don't write well. It's just a fact of life, and this opinion is just terribly written. There are no commas, there are no periods, the punctuation, it's very tough to read. If you want to read good writing, read non-legal stuff. It's just lawyers cannot be good writers. It's true. Read Brian Garner's books; he's excellent. But most writing is just direct. Even on appellate courts, it's not very good. You know the trick, right? There actually are studies on this. So the better writers on the Supreme Court, are consistent year to year, right? How do you measure this? When there's more variability in a justice's writing, it means the law clerk's a variable, right? Because the law clerks change every year, but the justice is the same. So if the writing changes style from year to year, you know that the clerk's actually doing the heavy lifting. And then some judges, like a Scalia or a Kagan, right? Their writing is consistent because they're doing the hard work, not these scruffy law clerks, right? They're doing the good stuff. So you know, if a judge writes good year out, they're doing the work on the clerks. Not all the justices write their opinions, though. They export. All right. All right. So let's do Lohmeyer. Yeah. So Joey, why don't you have the facts based on Lohmeyer, please?
So you had Dr. Lohmeyer had entered into a contract with the Bowers to purchase a lot that had a house on it. But he had reached out with a lawyer to examine the property, kind of do a survey, and found out that there were some deed restrictions against it. One of which was you couldn't have a framed house. Like if there was a framed house, it had to be 2 stories.
Okay.
And the house sitting on the current lot was only 1 story.
Good.
And
what other problems are there?
The other one was the house was built too close to the property boundaries.
Very good. Okay, so this is one of the first cases we've had that actually involves deeds and zoning. We'll do these later this semester. But very often you have what are called deed restrictions. You'll see these all over Houston. This is a deed restricted community, right? You've seen these signs? That means that when the property was first acquired, decades ago, whenever it was, that the one person divided up the lot and put certain conditions on it. So for example, on this lot, it says any house must be at least 2 stories. Does anyone want to guess why you would put this sort of requirement in that a house has to be 2 stories? You want to guess, Andrew?
Is it worth more so the property value of the neighborhood goes up?
And what else does that do?
It just makes everything cost more, so you get more money when you sell it.
And what's the consequence of that?
It's also a way for, it was a racial stratification method.
Yeah, it keeps out certain people, right? Poor people, however you want to define it, right? But when you say a house must be 2 stories versus 1, that means someone who can only afford a 1-story house can't live there. So, I mean, we'll do this topic a lot later in the semester, but just as a preview. For example, why do you have to have a certain backyard size, right? Do they really care that your kids have enough space? No, it's more land you have to buy. These are things that just make your purchase price higher. You know, there's no way to, you know, you can't sugarcoat it very much. I think Mike said it pretty well, but it's to keep certain people out. Likewise, this is not just a deed, but there's a zoning issue. What's called a setback. Setback. S-E-T-B-A-C-K. That means from the street or the sidewalk to your property line, there has to be a certain number of feet. Was it 3 feet in this case, I think? Right? You have to have a certain number of feet between the street and the sidewalk. Why? It looks nice, right? You're not like crowding up against a sidewalk. You have a front yard, things like this. Again, these zoning laws are not much different than the deeds. They're designed at raising property values and perhaps invariably excluding certain people from a neighborhood. Yeah, Andrew?
So if like the government takes over, I guess, for the sidewalk, eminent domain for like to build a wider road or something, then what do? Are you grandfathered in? But then if you sell it, do they have to change it?
There's a lot in that question. Let me try and unpack it.
Okay.
So generally, you don't own the sidewalk of your property. Generally, that the streets and the sidewalk are the commons, and that the government has a right for people to walk across it, right? Because if you owned your sidewalk, you could build a wall and stop people from walking your sidewalk, and that doesn't work very well. So generally, you don't own your sidewalk. If the government wants to expand the width of a street, and they say they want to take a part of your front lawn, in that case, they would need to use a power of eminent domain, which we'll cover later this term. Did I think all of your questions in there?
No.
No, what did I miss?
I'm saying if they do that and you have a zoning ordinance saying like you can't be away from the sidewalk for a certain
Yes, you're grandfathered in. Yes, yes, okay. So there were 2 problems here, right? One, the thing says only 2-story houses, not 1-story house. And second, you have to have 3 feet, I think they had, 18 inches or something, right? So there were problems, right? Name?
Zach.
Zach, yeah, Zach. Zach, what should Dr. Lohmeyer have done before he bought this house?
I mean, checked this out, make sure that
Yeah.
he could have done what he wanted to.
Couldn't he have, determined if there was a zoning ordinance on the books? I mean, this is public record, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you go down to the city and you find 3 feet setback, you measure it with your ruler, right? And could you check the deed restrictions?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're public records, right? These are all public records. When you do a title search, you would learn that the deed restriction says 3 feet, you got only, what, 18 inches. He didn't do this, though. Now, Zach, the harder question, did he need to worry about all these other things? Did he need to worry about them?
All of these other things.
Meaning the zoning and the deed restriction. Did he need to worry about those?
I'm not sure what you mean by like.
Well, let's read it. Let's read it. It says, yeah, so let's read it. It says, you read it for me. Just read the text.
By warranty deed with an abstract of title certified to date showing good merchantable title.
Okay, let me pause you right there. Zach, what does that phrase "good merchantable title" mean?
Like that it, meets the standard that a reasonable person would expect.
Okay, what is a marketable title? What does that mean?
Oh, that there's not. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but like superior.
Yeah.
Like no one else.
Good. So here's the definition that Kansas court gives. It says, you can write this down. A marketable title is one which is free from reasonable doubt. A marketable title is one that is free from reasonable doubt. Sounds like crim pro, right? Reasonable doubt. Now, what makes it unmarketable? A title is unmarketable if it exposes the party to litigation. A title is unmarketable if it exposes a party to litigation. Everyone understand? And was this title marketable?
No.
No, why not?
Because it had these violations.
But specifically, what about those violations made the title unmarketable?
Well, it exposed him to litigation.
Bingo.
Because then he could have been sued.
By whom?
The city or the neighborhood.
Yes, bingo. Got both of them, right? This property exposed the buyer to 2 sets of litigation. First, if you're in violation of a zoning ordinance, the city can take an enforcement action against you. They can give you a fine, or they can even say, you need to chop up your property line, or buy more land, or do something to get to 3 feet. And if you can't get to 3 feet, you maybe have luck. But it's not only enforcement action from the government, and mention the neighborhood. If you have a deed restricted community, what does that mean? The HOA, the homeowners association, or a neighbor perhaps, can bring an action against you for being in violation of the ordinance. I'm sorry, the deed. And if the deed says you have a 2-story house, how do you fix this? You can build a 2nd floor of your house. I mean, I suppose you can do it. That's expensive, right? Build another floor in your house. That's a lot of money. You probably have to move and leave. So Lil Meyer is basically walking into a trap, so to speak. Again, it's not a trap, and it was visible. He should have known. But the title they gave him exposed him to litigation. Therefore, the title was not marketable, or was not merchantable, to use the language they use, right? So Joyce, what happens when you have a title that's not merchantable? Is the transaction valid?
No.
No. What happens to the transaction? What's the court do?
You'll get the house.
Was Lomar required to go ahead and finish the transaction because it was not a valid title?
No, he wasn't.
He was not. He's excused, right?
Yeah.
You set aside the contract. You set aside the contract because it was not marketable. It was not a merchantable title. Again, the contract said, we promise to give you a good and merchantable title. If it's not good and merchantable, contract's void. And he even says, look, free and clear of all encumbrances. But, Sidra, it says the next sentence, subject, however, to our restrictions and easement of record applying to this property. Didn't they tip them off there might be some restrictions and easements? Why is that enough, right? Why does the court not say, subject, however, to our restrictions and easements? Why doesn't that make it okay? They disclose there are some restrictions on it. Why is that not enough?
Because
Can you repeat the question?
So look, I'm going to highlight it. If it's hard to see, I apologize. Right? It says, subject, however, to all restrictions. It's in the fourth line of the grant, right? Subject, however, to all restrictions and easements of record. Why doesn't that cure it? Right? Why doesn't that make it okay? It's like, look, I'm selling you a land. It's got some restrictions on it. Take them as you will. Why is that not enough?
Because it may not be fair to the other party if they don't know, or it's not marketable.
No, Jenica?
I think that the reason is because even though they're selling them this property, they're saying it's subject to these restrictions, but the problem is that whenever they buy this property, they're going to have to add so much to it, like, or figure out what to do. And so they're selling them kind of a problem as opposed to what they think they're buying. Because these people think they're buying the house, but instead they're buying all this big mess, kind of.
Well, let me ask you a question like this, Jenica. Does having a zoning restriction apply to a house rendered an unmarketable title? Merely having the zoning restriction in existence.
No.
What renders it unmarketable?
The fact that it's that they're going to have to go into lawsuits because.
Why do they have to go into lawsuits? Is it the existence of the zoning law?
No.
What is it?
It's the fact that.
What if their house was 2 stories? Would there be a problem?
Well, I mean, yes, because it's still not far enough. From
And it was 2 stories tall and they had a huge front yard. Would there be a problem then?
No.
So the zoning restriction would still apply, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But why is this case different? Is it the existence of the zoning law?
No, it's the fact that it violates.
Yes, there it is. It's the fact that it's being violated, right? The mere existence of a restriction or easement is fine, right? The mere existence of a restriction does not render the title unmarketable. What renders the title marketable is the
fact that it's in violation.
Violation thereof. It's the violation of the easement and covenants and deeds that's rendered. You can have a house that's subject to covenants and easements and zoning, that's fine, there's no problem. But you can't walk into a trap of it being violated because the first day you move in, you get hit with an enforcement action, unmarketable title, therefore the contract's voided. Even with this language in play. Everyone understand, right? What renders the title unmarketable is not the existence of the easement or the deed. What renders it unmarketable is the fact that the deed's being violated, that the easement's violated, the zoning ordinance is violated. You can't have a house that's in violation, the title is not marketable, it's gone. Now, Marcos, is there a requirement to sell property with a good marketable title? Can you just say, take it as is? Can you do that?
Is there a policy? Is that what you just asked me?
Can you do that? Can you sell a piece of property that's basic crap and say, look, take it as is? You know, like you go to a used car dealership, a little sticker in the middle that says, as is?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. And if you say I'm giving it to you as is there any problem?
No, because you're disclosing that is as is.
Yeah, Marcos is right. So you can sell a piece of crap property, right? You can sell it with all these problems. Say, look, I'm going to sell it to you for $1. Just get it off my hands. And maybe the person can fix it, build a second story, whatever. So you can sell land that's not in conformity with zoning laws, but you got to disclose it. You have to say, look, you're taking this as is. I make no representations. But because you put this phrase, good merchantable title, that killed it. That killed it. All right, any questions on this case?
I have a question.
Yeah, Aaron.
If they were to identify each issue with the house, that's essentially saying as is, right? If they were to say...
Well, but not just identify the issues, that this is in violation of this thing.
Right.
And if they're saying not just subject to restrictions, but in violation of, I think they'd be okay there.
Okay.
Yeah? All right, so let me summarize briefly. Keep in mind the distinction between a title and a deed. They're different concepts. The title is a legal relationship. The deed is the physical instrument. And also, with respect to the concept of this merchantable title, there cannot be any doubts or hazards of litigation. That's what make it merchantable. Anything in your minds? All right, I'll see you all on Wednesday.